Hello and welcome to the Monday, September 29th, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Jacksonville, Florida. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Graduate Certificate Program in Industrial Control System Security. Quick script from Jim this weekend for anybody doing forensics, incident response, something to convert the Unix timestamps in bash history files to a more human-readable ISO format. Adding timestamps to bash history is obviously useful in incident response. If it's not done by your system, all you have to do is add a hist time format variable to your bash RC or a similar file. And with that, you basically define the format. It's often defined as a Unix timestamp. Part of this is to make it easy to sort. The file is being written whenever a shell exits. So if you have multiple shells running around the same time, well, these particular commands may not necessarily be in time order as they're being saved to the file. And of course, the usual caveats about this file being potentially manipulated or disabled by an attacker applies. And then we still have to talk about the Cisco vulnerability that I mentioned last week, the vulnerability that had already been exploited. So again, this affects the ASA and firepower devices. Note that exploitation of the devices likely started about a year ago. I've seen numbers in news articles and so that mention 2 million affected devices. Now note that these are potentially vulnerable devices, not exploited devices. I think that distinction sometimes got lost in some of the articles that I've seen. At this point, there's only a very small number of actual exploited devices as far as I've seen. And the exploit itself is not public yet. And from everything I heard, is not trivial. So still, you do want to patch, of course. And now there's the race on to find an exploit and make it public for a vulnerability like that. But overall, the chances that you were exploited before the actual patch was released aren't that super high, unless you're sort of in something that you would consider yourself as targeted, in particular by Chinese state-sponsored actor. Now we have a number of write-ups around this. I want to point out CISA's one. CISA also offers its malware next-gen portal to detect infected systems. The way this works is that you create a core dump on your particular Cisco device and then upload it to CISA for automatic analysis. Now, CISA's advice, as always, is focusing on the US federal government, but typically, of course, their advice is well-sourced and well thought out, so definitely something that you should consider. As far as uploading malware to the Malware Next Gen portal goes, you must be registered with the portal. That means login.gov. So this is restricted at this point to US citizens, but you do not have to be affiliated with the US federal government. You just have to basically figure out if that's something that you want to do or not. Not all ASA devices have patches available. There are some affected ASA devices that are end of life, and the only option for those is, of course, to replace them with newer models. It is critical you get patching now, before we have any more widespread exploitation of this. According to Cisco, affected devices have been found with modified ROM monitor, or short often called ROMmon. This is firmware that is basically sort of the run during boot, and by modifying the ROMmon, well, the malware is able to persist reboots and also some software updates. However, the specific update released by Cisco in this case will specifically scan ROMmon and apply a fix if it finds it to be modified. Firmware_update.log file is left in that case on disk 0. So if it found something odd with ROMmon, and Cisco recommends that if that's the case, if you see the firmware_update.log file, you must assume the device is compromised. You must change passwords, keys, certificates. Remember, we had that issue many times before where devices like this were compromised, and then even two-factor authentication seeds and such were stolen. Not sure the two-factor authentication seed is an issue here with this particular Cisco devices. And Cisco also requests that any user who runs into an infected device does open a ticket with customer support for further help and also advice and analysis of what exactly happened there. Your device is considered vulnerable if it has the VPN web services enabled. So if you don't have the VPN web service enabled, then you shouldn't be vulnerable. Of course, you may have had it enabled in the past or such. That can sometimes be a little bit difficult to figure out and distinguish. I'll add links to the Cisco advisory as well as to CISA's in the show notes. So if you want to read up on some of the details that either are published, take a look at that. And like I said, this is something that this week you really have to get a handle on whether or not you're vulnerable, apply the patches, and then make sure that you haven't already been exploited. The target group here is not necessarily just government networks. In the past, we have seen some private entities like either suppliers or even law firms in some cases being hit by malware like this. And talking about some more targeted attacks, the next attack is also a bit targeted, and this is the use of GitHub notifications that are being abused. On GitHub, if a user is mentioned in an issue, GitHub notifies the user of the issue via email. Sadly, these notifications are customizable enough to make it difficult to distinguish these notifications from other email. Bleeping Computer is reporting that the latest wave of these attacks was used to impersonate the startup accelerator Y Combinator. And the target here apparently were crypto coin related companies, and the lure consists of an email notifying the victim of being accepted for funding from Y Combinator. I think they offered something like $15 million. That, of course, entices most startup founders and such to click on those emails. And in this case, the email was then led to a Y Combinator lookalike website that then made them install some malware that drained their cryptocurrency accounts. This is something that's always a little bit hard to sort of put into awareness presentations such, but you have a little bit of more targeted attack like this, where they're using systems like GitHub that many of these founders and people associated with startups are more or less trusting. And then, of course, Y Combinator being something that many of them have probably applied for funding for. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening, and thanks for recommending, for liking this podcast. Also, thanks for anybody who is leaving a good comment. That's it for today, and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.